As I mentioned to many of you, if not all of you, in my feedback on your discussion posts, I really appreciate the ways that you were able to disagree with each other without being um, rude or uncivil in any way. As we read and as we listened to in Unit 2, the controversy over the Oñate statue runs deep. And many of you touched on the reasons for that. Um, so, something I want to talk about here then is that I really appreciated your focus on historical preservation. So, whichever side of this debate you took, everyone seemed to have that idea that we need to preserve our past, even the difficult and violent portions of that past. We need to understand that as a community, as a society, as New Mexicans. And I, especially as a history instructor, I could not agree with that more. The thing that we have to think about, though, is how do we do that? And that's why the statue is so controversial, I think, is that statues don't preserve the past. So I'll say that again. Statues do not preserve the past. They are not primary sources. Oh, well, I guess they could be in certain contexts depending on what the research question was, right? But in terms of the statue of Oñate does not represent some primary source about Oñate, about his story, about the history of the early Spanish conquest. Instead, it says more about the period of the late 1990s and what a certain sector of the New Mexico community had valued. And as we listened to in the 99% Invisible podcast, there are a lot of Nuevo Mexicanos who, very rightfully so, wanted to see themselves reflected in our nation's history and in their own local history. And so Oñate became to them a sort of figure to hold up on a pedestal, quite literally an equestrian statue. Um, but to Native people, especially to Pueblo people, Oñate symbolizes something very different, something very dark, and a very traumatic and horrific part of their past. That, as the video indicated about the statue of Oñate in El Paso, this is akin to a monument to genocide. The Spanish colonization ushered in a genocide of Pueblo peoples to a certain extent. And so um, what the statue does then is it represents what we as a community value, or at least that's what it should do. The problem with the Oñate piece then is that it represents only part of a community of our community's values and histories. Um, the statue itself does not provide any context about what Oñate actually did, so visitors can't go up to that statue and learn something meaningful about Oñate and understand that he, enacted the violence after the Acoma massacre, that he mutilated or at least ordered the mutilation of Acoma men. Those stories are not told on that statue. So if we want to preserve those difficult histories, a statue isn't necessarily the way to do it, right? Or at least the kind of statue that the Oñate statue is. Because what it does is it kind of glorifies Oñate as this is somebody that we should know, a name we should remember, a guy who is gallant and on horseback. That's why the Friends of Acoma, when they cut off the foot from the statue, that was such a strong and significant gesture in terms of actually adding context. That's part of this kind of public history debate and conversation. They're adding back in a piece of the story that the statue didn't tell, right? By taking that action. Um, and so, again, we need to focus on what statues do, what is their purpose. Their purpose is to glorify and tell a certain story. They're secondary sources in most senses, right? At least as far as they are constructed at the time they are made. And so the other question then is, how is history preserved, right? I keep saying right. I don't usually talk that way. I don't know why I'm doing it right now. Anyway, so how is history actually preserved? for this class, we're not going out and studying all the statues. We are telling far more stories than just Oñates in our class, and you've learned a lot more than just the story of Oñate. So how did we learn all those other things? It's not statues that keep those records. Statues can present a certain narrative, though, to the public about our past. And so those should be things that we work on together, that we collaborate on, and that present multiple sides of a story. And that can be very difficult, as we've found. So in the activity feed, I mentioned at the beginning of the course that sometimes I'll put stuff there. Remember, that's at the very bottom of the homepage on Brightspace. I'm going to put a link to the National Peace and Justice Memorial. It's the museum that was just put up a few years ago in Birmingham to commemorate lynching, the victims of lynching. And so I wanted to just have you, look at that, think about that, and think about what is the purpose of that memorial, right? So it's not a memorial to glorify a certain event or a certain person, as the Confederate statues do and did, and that's why they are controversial as well. But instead, it's about healing. It's about recognizing those difficult moments in our past. So it's actually about all of the things that everyone said in your letters to the county manager, right? It's about preserving history. It's about helping us understand it and helping us heal. That's not something that we mentioned in the discussion, but I think it's something that is important and is necessary, that we as Americans have not done well, because we have a hard time being honest about our past. So anyway, I'll end it there. I'll put the thing in the activity feed, and there is an extra credit opportunity with that if you are so inclined.